The sky over Seoul didn't cry for Imani Caldwell. It bled ice. On her 18th birthday, the only gift she received was the heavy thud of the front door locking behind her. Through the frosted glass, she saw the blurred silhouettes of her parents, Terrence and Lorraine, already moving her meager belongings to the curb to make room for her brother Micah's success. Labeled a useless burden, Imani was cast out into a city that didn't know her name. Now, hours later, her voluminous curls were matted with sleet, and her deep brown skin was ashen from the bone-deep chill. She huddled in a dark alleyway, clutching a backpack that held the ruins of her life, her breath hitching in ragged, terrified sobs. Then, the world turned blindingly white. The low, predatory hum of a high-performance engine vibrated through the pavement. A fleet of black luxury sedans slid into the alley like shadows in the night. The lead car stopped mere inches from her trembling knees. Two massive bodyguards in charcoal suits stepped out, their hands hovering near their waistbands, ready for a threat that wasn't there. Then, the rear door opened. Han Yi-hyun stepped into the grime. At 40, he carried the aura of a man who had stared into the sun and didn't blink. His dark hair was swept back, and the striking tiger tattoo on his muscular arm glowed under the streetlights, a mark of the most feared Mafia boss in South Korea. He didn't look at her with pity. He looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. He knelt in the mud, his luxury wristwatch glinting as he reached out to catch a single, freezing tear from her cheek. "The world threw you away." Yi-hyun's voice was a deep, gravelly baritone that felt like a warm blanket. "But I have been looking for something worth keeping. Come with me, Imani. From tonight, no one will ever discard you again." What happens when the girl with nothing becomes the obsession of the man who owns everything? "Hello, family. How are you doing? Nice to have you here. Before I continue, I would love to know where you are watching from. Kindly drop it in the comment and also subscribe to this channel if you are new here." Now let's proceed with the story. The dining room of the Caldwell home was suffocatingly warm, the air thick with the scent of a roast chicken that Imani hadn't been invited to touch. She stood by the doorway, her fingers twisting the hem of her worn sweater, waiting for the birthday surprise her father had mentioned earlier that morning. In her heart, a small, foolish spark of hope flickered. Perhaps, now that she was legal, they would finally see her. Perhaps Terrence would look at her with the same pride he reserved for Micah, or Lorraine would offer her a smile that wasn't strained with hidden resentment. "Sit down, Imani," Terrence said, his voice as stern and immovable as a mountain. He didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on Micah, who was busy scrolling through a high-end laptop, a pre-graduation gift that had cost more than Imani's entire childhood wardrobe. "We've made a decision," Lorraine added, her voice smooth and cold like fine porcelain. She carefully wiped her mouth with a linen napkin, avoiding Imani's gaze. "As you know, Micah's prospects are the future of this family. His tutors say he has the potential to lead a major firm, but he needs space. He needs a dedicated wing for his studies and his network. A heir's sanctuary, as the consultant put it." Imani felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air outside. "A wing, but we only have 3 bedrooms." "Exactly," Terrence snapped, finally looking at her, though his eyes held no warmth. "You're 18 today, Imani. You've finished your basic schooling, and frankly, we've invested as much as we can into a daughter who brings no return. You are a financial drain we can no longer afford if Micah is to succeed. We've packed your things. They're by the door." The silence that followed was deafening. Imani's ears rang as she looked from her father's hardened face to her mother's indifferent expression. Micah didn't even look up from his screen. To him, she was already a ghost. You're kicking me out." Imani's voice was a fragile thread. "On my birthday, it's freezing outside, Dad. I have no money, no place to go." "You have your health and your youth," Lorraine said, as if she were discussing the weather. "The world is full of opportunities for girls who are willing to work. We've done our duty by you for 18 years. Now it's Micah's turn to be the priority. He is the one who will bring fortune to the Caldwell name. You are just a placeholder." Terrence stood up, ending the conversation. He walked to the hallway, grabbed a single, scuffed suitcase, and opened the front door. The gust of wind that swept in was brutal, carrying the scent of impending snow. "Don't make this a scene, Imani. It's time to be an adult." With a strength she didn't know she possessed, Imani walked toward the door. As she passed the dining table, she looked at her mother one last time, searching for a flicker of regret, a tear, a second thought. There was nothing. Lorraine simply adjusted the centerpiece on the table, her mind already moving on to the renovations of Imani's former room. The door clicked shut, with a finality that felt like a guillotine. The first hour on the street was a blur of shock. Imani walked aimlessly, her suitcase wheels rattling against the uneven pavement of the Seoul suburbs. The city she had grown up in suddenly felt like a foreign, hostile planet. She watched as families sat behind glowing windows, sharing dinner and laughter, while she became a shadow moving through the sleet. As night deepened, the cold became an apex predator. It gnawed through her thin jacket, turning her deep brown skin ashen and making her bones ache with a dull, rhythmic throb. She found herself in a narrow alleyway near the city center, the neon signs of the high-rise buildings mocking her from above. She sat on a damp crate, pulling her knees to her chest and wrapping her voluminous curls in a threadbare scarf. The hunger was a sharp pain at first, then a hollow, empty roar. But the emotional pain was worse. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the way Micah hadn't even waved goodbye. She saw the way her parents had prioritized a future fortune over their own flesh and blood. She was 18, homeless, and entirely alone in a world that only valued what you could provide. She let out a ragged sob, the sound muffled by the brick walls around her. She was a placeholder that had been discarded. As the sleet turned into heavy, wet snow, Imani began to wonder if she would even survive to see the morning sun, unaware that the headlights of a black sedan were already turning into the alley, carrying a man who would soon teach her that her value was beyond measure. The black luxury sedan moved through the winding streets of Seoul like a silent, predatory shark. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of sandalwood and expensive leather, a sharp contrast to the biting chill Imani had just escaped. She sat pressed against the far door, her fingers digging into the velvet upholstery. Beside her, Han Yi-hyun sat in a stillness that was more terrifying than any outburst. He didn't speak, but his presence seemed to fill the entire cabin, a dark and magnetic force that made the small of her back tingle with fear. When the car finally pulled into the private underground garage of a glass and steel monolith, the silence was broken only by the synchronized thud of the bodyguard's doors. Imani hesitated, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked at Yi-hyun, searching his sharp jawline and narrow, focused eyes for a sign of the cruelty she expected. "Step out, Imani," he said. His voice was a low, gravelly hum, not a command but a fact. "The cold cannot reach you here." They ascended in a private elevator that moved so smoothly it felt like they were suspended in a vacuum. When the doors opened, Imani gasped. The penthouse was a fortress of glass, overlooking the glittering expanse of the city below. It was a place of brutalist beauty, cold marble, dark wood, and minimalist art. It felt less like a home and more like a sanctuary for a king who trusted no one. "Sit," Yi-hyun directed, gesturing toward a sprawling charcoal sofa. Imani remained standing, her voluminous curls damp and wild, her deep brown skin shimmering under the recessed lighting. She looked small against the backdrop of his immense wealth. "Why did you bring me here?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What do you want from me? I have no money, my family. They threw me away because I'm useless. If you're looking for a ransom, there's no one coming for me." Yi-hyun discarded his tailored vest, revealing the powerful sweep of the tiger tattoo that climbed from his bicep to the nape of his neck. He poured a glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter and turned to her. "I don't want your family's money. I have more than I can spend in 10 lifetimes. And I don't believe you are useless, Imani. I believe you were simply planted in the wrong soil." The kindness in his words only made her more suspicious. Her parents had taught her that every act of generosity came with a hidden invoice. Her father's guidance was just a demand for silence. Her mother's care was a requirement for perfection. "Everyone wants something," she snapped, her eyes filling with defensive tears. "Are you going to make me work in your kitchens? Are you? Is this a cage?" She backed away as he took a step forward, her heel catching on the edge of a silk rug. "I want to leave. I should go." Yi-hyun moved with a speed that defied his large frame. He didn't grab her, but he blocked her path, his shadow falling over her like a heavy shroud. He was close enough that she could see the golden flecks in his dark irises. "You want to go back to the alley?" he asked softly. Back to the parents who traded your life for your brother's convenience. The world outside these walls is hungry, Imani. It will swallow a girl like you and never spit out the bones. At least I know the rules out there, she cried, a single tear catching the light as it rolled down her cheek. I know how people like you work. You buy things, you own things. I'm not a thing you can just add to your collection. Yi Hyun reached out, his hand hovering near her face before he slowly tucked a damp curl behind her ear. His touch was unexpectedly warm, and his luxury wristwatch clicked against his cuff, a rhythmic sound in the sudden silence. You are right, he murmured, his gaze unreadable and intense. I do buy what I want, but I don't collect ghosts. You are terrified because you think I am another predator, but you are mistaken. In this city, I am the only one who keeps the predators away. He signaled to a maid who had appeared silently in the shadows. Take her to the guest suite. Prepare a bath. Find clothes that do not smell of abandonment. She stays here. As Imani was led away, she looked back at him. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, the city lights reflecting in his dark eyes like a sea of fire. He looked like a man who had everything, yet he had looked at her as if she were the missing piece of his empire. She was safe from the cold, but as the door to the luxurious suite clicked shut, she realized she was now trapped in the shadow of a tiger, and she didn't know if he meant to protect her or wait for the right moment to strike. The golden sunlight of the following morning did nothing to soothe the panic clawing at Imani's chest. The guest suite was a masterpiece of ivory silk and polished marble, but to her, it felt like a waiting room for a disaster. She had spent a restless night staring at the ceiling, her mind looping through the same terrifying thought. If her parents found out she was under the roof of a man like Han Yi Hyun, they wouldn't be relieved. They would be furious. Her father, Terrence, had always warned her that her clumsiness and incompetence would eventually embarrass the family name. In his eyes, her mere existence in a mafia boss's penthouse would be seen as a deliberate act of sabotage against Micah's pristine future. She waited until she heard the distant, rhythmic hum of the espresso machine in the kitchen, signaling that the household was awake. Heart hammering, Imani crept toward the massive mahogany doors of the suite. She was still wearing the oversized silk robe the maid had provided, her feet bare against the cold stone. She didn't have a plan. She only had the instinct of a wounded animal to return to the shadows where it was safe to be invisible. She had barely reached the end of the long, art-lined hallway when the elevator doors chimed. She froze. Yi Hyun stepped out, looking immaculate in a white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing the dark, intricate ink of the tiger on his forearm. He stopped, his gaze dropping to her bare feet, and then to the way she was clutching the walls like a fugitive. Going somewhere, Imani? He asked. His tone was light, but his eyes were like flint. I have to go, she whispered, her voice cracking. You don't understand. If my father finds out I'm here, if he thinks I'm troubling someone of your stature, he'll come for me, not to take me back, but to make sure I never show my face in this city again. I'm a liability to them. Please, let me go before they see me on a security camera or a news report. Yi Hyun walked toward her, each step slow and deliberate. He didn't stop until he was inches away, his shadow completely eclipsing her. You are so afraid of people who have already discarded you. Why? Because they are the only world I've ever known, she cried, her tears finally spilling over, hot and bitter. To them, I am a mistake. If I'm here with you, I'm a dangerous mistake. They'll say I'm trying to ruin Micah's reputation by association. They'll punish me for being alive. Yi Hyun reached out, not to restrain her, but to cup her face. His hand was large, warm, and steady. He used his thumb to catch a tear before it could reach her lip. They can only punish you if you belong to them, Imani. But what if you belonged to someone they were too terrified to touch? Imani blinked through her blurred vision. What? In this country, blood is power, but a name is a fortress, Yi Hyun said, his voice dropping into a resonant, solemn baritone. He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath hitch, a gaze that saw past her fear and into the woman she was becoming. I need a wife to solidify my position with the Elder Council. They want me to show stability, to prove I have something to protect other than territory. And you need a shield that cannot be pierced by Terrence Caldwell's spite. He took a step closer, his luxury wristwatch catching the morning light. I am offering you my last name. If you marry me, legally and publicly, you are no longer a useless daughter. You become the matriarch of the Hand Syndicate. If your father so much as looks at you with a frown, it will be considered an act of war against me. I will give you a vow, Imani. No one, not even your own blood, will ever make you feel like a placeholder again." The room seemed to shrink. Imani looked at him, at the man who was both a monster to the world and a sanctuary to her. The idea was insane. She was 18, a girl who had been sleeping in an alleyway 24 hours ago. But as she looked into Yi Hyun's dark, unblinking eyes, she realized he wasn't asking for her love or her service. He was offering her a throne in exchange for her safety. "You would marry me," she whispered, "just like that to keep me safe." "I don't do anything just like that," Yi Hyun replied, his hand moving to rest on her shoulder, his touch possessive and grounding. "I do it because I have never seen a girl fight so hard to stay invisible, and I want to see what happens when you decide to be seen. You will never freeze again. You will never hunger. You will be Han Yi Hyun's wife. Do you accept the vow?" Imani looked at the glass windows, at the city that had tried to swallow her whole. Then she looked back at the man with the tiger tattoo. For the first time in her life, she wasn't choosing the path of least resistance. She was choosing the dragon. "Yes," she breathed, "I accept." The transition from the cold concrete of the streets to the heated marble of the Han estate was a surreal, golden blur. For the first few weeks, Imani moved through the penthouse like a ghost haunting a palace, waiting for the moment the dream would shatter and she would find herself back in the sleet. But the shatter never came. Instead, the world around her began to transform under Yi Hyun's silent, meticulous command. The spoiling began not with jewelry, but with touch and care. Yi Hyun had a team of world-class stylists and tailors arrive at the penthouse, turning the expansive living area into a private atelier. Imani stood on a small pedestal, her deep brown skin glowing against the swaths of emerald silk and champagne satin they draped over her frame. She looked at her reflection, hardly recognizing the girl with the voluminous, healthy curls and the soft, radiant expression. Gone were the tattered rags of her 18th birthday. In their place were custom-made gowns that felt like a second skin. "Why so many?" Imani whispered one afternoon as Yi Hyun watched a tailor pin the hem of a charcoal-gray wool coat. "I have nowhere to go." Yi Hyun, leaning against a mahogany desk with a crystal glass in hand, didn't look away. His eyes followed every movement of the tailor, needle with a sharp, possessive focus. "You have everywhere to go, Imani, but more importantly, you have a home to be in. You will never wear the scent of poverty again. I want the world to see you and know that you are cherished before you even speak a word." It wasn't just the physical transformation. Yi Hyun understood that her family had stunted her growth, treating her mind as a barren field while they poured all their resources into Micah. To remedy this, he brought in the best tutors Seoul had to offer, experts in art, languages, and high finance. He didn't want a trophy, he was building a partner. One evening, Imani sat in the library, frustrated by a complex economic theory she was studying. She felt a familiar, sharp pang of self-doubt, the voice of her father echoing in her head, telling her she was too slow, too useless. She didn't hear Yi Hyun enter until his hand rested on the back of her chair. "It's too much," she sighed, closing the leather-bound book. "Maybe my father was right. Maybe I don't have the head for this." Yi Hyun knelt beside her chair, a move that brought his face level with hers. The tiger tattoo on his arm seemed to ripple under the soft lamplight. He took her hand in his thumb tracing the delicate lines of her palm. "Your father is a man who blinded himself so he wouldn't have to see your light. He needed you to be small so he could feel tall. I am not that man." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers, a gesture of profound intimacy that made Imani's heart skip a beat. "I don't love you because you are perfect, Imani. I love you because you survived a desert and still have a heart made of rain. Take your time. My empire isn't going anywhere, and neither am I." That was the moment the profound love Yi Hyun had promised began to take root. It wasn't just the expensive gifts, the diamond-encrusted watch that hummed against her wrist, or the private chef who prepared her favorite comfort foods. It was the way he listened when she spoke, the way he stood between her and the world without smothering her, and the way he looked at her during dinner as if she were the only person in the room. He began to take her to the dragon's private garden on the roof, a sanctuary filled with rare flora and the sound of falling water. There, under the canopy of the stars, he would tell her stories of his own rise to power, admitting his vulnerabilities in a way he did for no one else. He pampered her not as a master spoils a pet, but as a king honors his queen. He bought her a grand piano when he overheard her humming a melody, and he spent hours watching her play, his cold Mafia exterior melting away whenever she smiled at him. For the first time in 18 years, Imani felt her shoulders drop. The constant, vibrating tension of survival was being replaced by a deep-seated security. She was being spoiled, yes, but she was also being seen. Every silk dress and every private lesson was a brick in the fortress Yihayan was building around her soul. She was no longer the girl abandoned in the rain. She was the woman the most dangerous man in Seoul came home to, and in his arms, she finally found the grace to forgive herself for being alive. The golden gates of the Han Empire were designed to keep the world out, but they could not stop the digital tide of the city from flowing in. A month after their private vows, the first images of the Dragon's Bride leaked to the press. It happened at the Winter Gala for the Seoul Children's Hospital, an event where the city's elite gathered to flaunt their status. Imani had stepped out of the black sedan draped in a gown of midnight blue velvet that shimmered like a captured nebula, her voluminous curls pinned back with a tiara of black diamonds. Beside her, Yihayan had walked with his usual cold authority, but the way he had leaned down to whisper in her ear, his hand possessively on the small of her back, told a story the cameras couldn't wait to sell. The clip went viral within hours. It was a study in absolute transformation, the mystery woman with the deep, radiant complexion and the regal poise of a queen. 30 miles away, in the Caldwell living room, the atmosphere was far from regal. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and the palpable vibration of anxiety. Terrence sat at the dining table, surrounded by overdue notices and a stack of failed business proposals for Micah's revolutionary logistics app, a venture that had drained their savings and yielded nothing but debt. Lorraine sat on the sofa, her eyes fixed on the tablet in her lap, her face contorted into a mask of disbelief. "Terrence," she whispered, her voice trembling not with sadness but with a sharp, jagged envy. "Look at this." Terrence leaned over, his eyes narrowing as the high-definition video played. He saw the girl he had kicked out in the sleet, the daughter he had labeled a financial drain. But she wasn't shivering. She was standing in the center of a swarm of photographers, looking down at the world with a calm, untouchable grace. He saw the man beside her, Han Yihayan, and he felt a cold sweat break across his brow. Everyone in Seoul knew that name. To cross Han was to court death. To be loved by him was to hold the keys to the city. "It can't be," Terrence hissed, his fist slamming onto the table, rattling Micah's expensive, unused laptop. She was supposed to be a nobody. She was supposed to crawl back and beg for our forgiveness once she realized the world had no place for her. "She looks like a billionaire," Micah muttered, stepping out of his room with bloodshot eyes. He looked at the screen, his jealousy a physical weight in the room. He was the golden son, the heir who was supposed to bring fortune to the Caldwell name, yet he was drowning in failure while the sister he had ignored was being pampered by a king. "Dad, if she's married to him, she has millions, billions. And we're about to lose the house because of the bridge loan for my app." Lorraine zoomed in on the diamonds at Imani's throat. A single one of those stones could have saved their lifestyle for a decade. The realization didn't bring her joy or relief that her daughter was safe. It brought a bitter, corrosive spite. She felt cheated. In her mind, Imani's success was a theft, a fortune that belonged to the family, specifically to Micah, but had been wasted on a girl who had no right to it. "She did this to spite us," Lorraine said, her voice rising in a frantic, ugly pitch. "She found a monster to protect her just so she could rub our faces in it. Look at her, playing the part of a lady while we suffer. She hasn't sent a single cent. She hasn't even called to see how Micah is doing." "She's forgotten her roots," Terrence growled, the darkness in his heart bubbling to the surface. He looked at the unpaid bills and then back at the glowing image of his daughter. The useless placeholder had become a gold mine, and the Caldwells were like vultures circling a kill they hadn't made. "She thinks she's escaped us. She thinks she can just turn her back on the family that raised her." "What are we going to do?" Micah asked, his voice desperate. "The creditors called again today. They're threatening to take the cars." Terrence looked at the screen one last time, his eyes fixed on Imani's soft, happy smile, a smile he had never seen when she lived under his roof. To him, that smile was a challenge. "We reach out," he said, his voice dropping into a manipulative, low tone. We remind her that blood is thicker than water. We tell her we've been searching for her, that we're heartbroken over the misunderstanding. We get her alone, away from that man, and we remind her where she belongs. And if she says no? Lorraine asked. She won't, Terrence replied, his jaw tightening. She's always been soft. She's always craved our approval. We just have to pull the right strings, and she'll bring that Mafia fortune right back where it belongs to this family. To Micah. They sat in the dim light of their failing home, 3 vultures plotting to tear a piece out of the girl they had thrown to the wolves, unaware that the wolf she was now with had much sharper teeth than they could ever imagine. The velvet silence of the hand penthouse was broken by the sharp, persistent trill of a phone that shouldn't have had her number. Imani sat in the sun-drenched breakfast nook, a cup of rare jasmine tea in her hand, as she stared at the screen. It was an unknown caller, but the area code was a ghost from her past. Her heart, once a fragile thing, gave a single heavy thud against her ribs. Beside her, Yi Hyan lowered his morning paper, his sharp eyes narrowing as he sensed the sudden shift in her aura. Answer it, he said, his voice a grounding anchor. You are in a fortress, Imani. No voice from the past can hurt you unless you let it. With trembling fingers, she pressed the button. The voice that erupted from the speaker was one she had heard in her nightmares. It was Lorraine, but the cold, porcelain tone was gone, replaced by a wet, frantic sobbing that sounded entirely manufactured. Imani, oh, thank God, my baby girl, my beautiful daughter, Lorraine wailed, the sound echoing off the marble walls. We've been searching everywhere for you. We haven't slept. We haven't eaten. Terrence is a shell of a man haunted by the mistake we made that night. It was the stress, honey, the pressure of Micah's future. We snapped. Can you ever forgive us? Imani felt a wave of nausea. A month ago, she would have crumbled. She would have apologized for being kicked out. But she looked down at the luxury wristwatch Yi Hyan had given her, a symbol of a man who valued her time and her life, and she felt a cold, crystalline clarity. You didn't search for me, mother, Imani said, her voice surprisingly steady, though her deep brown skin paled slightly. You moved Micah into my room the same night I left. You didn't search for me until you saw me on the news wearing diamonds that cost more than your house. There was a muffled scuffle on the other end, and then Terrence's voice broke through, deep and manipulative. Imani, listen to your mother. We are family. Blood, we're in a terrible way. Sweetheart, Micah's business. There were complications. The banks are being predatory. They're going to take the roof from over our heads. You're married to a king now. A few million is nothing to a man like Han Yi Hyan. Save your family, Imani. Show the world you're the good daughter we raised. Imani looked at Yi Hyan. He was watching her, not with the intent to interfere, but with the steady pride of a man who had forged a sword and was now watching it hold its edge. He didn't offer to pay them off to make them go away. He knew that to give in to vultures was to be picked apart forever. The good daughter you raised died in the sleet on her 18th birthday, Imani said, her voice growing stronger with every word. She stood up, her silk robe billowing around her like a battle flag. You didn't call to ask if I was warm. You didn't call to ask if I had eaten. You called because your golden sun failed and you need a new bank. You called because you're greedy, not because you're sorry. How dare you? Terrence's voice lost its warmth instantly, the old venom returning. After everything we did for you, we fed you for 18 years, you owe us. I owe you nothing, Imani replied, a single tear of release rolling down her cheek. You didn't invest in a daughter, you gambled on a son, you lost. Do not call this number again, do not look for me. As far as I am concerned, the Caldwells died the night they locked that door. She disconnected the call and set the phone face down on the table. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't the silence of the alleyway. It was the silence of a queen who had just cut the final anchor to her past. Yi Hyan rose from his chair, walking toward her with that slow, predatory grace. He pulled her into his arms, his tiger tattoo pressing against the silk of her sleeve. He tucked her head under his chin, his large hand stroking her voluminous curls. They won't stop, he whispered into her hair, his voice a dark promise. Vultures never stop until they realize the prey has a protector. I know, Imani murmured, clinging to him. But for the first time, I don't care what they think. I'm not their placeholder anymore. She had won the first battle, but as she leaned into the profound love of the man who had saved her, she knew her family's desperation would only grow. They had tried tears, and they had failed. Now, she feared, they would try something much more dangerous. The desperation in the Caldwell household had reached a fever pitch, a toxic miasma that smelled of sour pride and impending ruin. Micah sat in the backseat of a stolen sedan, his hands shaking as he pulled a black hood over his head. Beside him, two of his old university friends, debt-ridden and desperate enough to listen to his half-baked plan, checked their industrial-grade zip ties. His father's voice rang in his ears like a curse. "If you can't bring the money, bring the girl. Once she's under our roof, he has to pay whatever we ask to get her back." To Terrence and Lorraine, Imani was no longer a person. She was a ransom note. And Micah, the golden child who had failed at everything else, saw this as his final chance to reclaim his throne. The opportunity came on a Tuesday afternoon. Imani had begun visiting a small, secluded greenhouse on the outskirts of the city, a place where she could practice the botany she was learning from her tutors. Yi-hyun usually insisted on a full security detail, but Imani had begged for a moment of normalcy. She was flanked by only 2 guards, who waited by the perimeter of the glass-walled building. Imani was kneeling by a bed of rare orchids, her fingers gently brushing the soil. The piece she had found with Yi-hyun was a fragile thing, a beautiful bloom she guarded fiercely. She heard the crunch of gravel behind her and expected the familiar, heavy tread of her security. Instead, a hand clamped over her mouth, the acrid scent of a chemical-soaked rag stinging her nose. "Don't fight me, Imani," a voice hissed. It was a voice she had shared a childhood with, now distorted by greed. "You're coming home. You've had your fun playing queen, but it's time to pay the family debt." The world tilted as the sedative began to cloud her senses. She saw Micah's face as he pulled the hood back for a second, not the face of a brother, but of a scavenger. He dragged her toward the side exit, his friends having created a diversion by setting a trash fire near the main gates to draw the guards away. But Micah had forgotten one crucial detail. Han Yi-hyun did not leave his most precious asset to chance. Imani's luxury wristwatch, the one he had fastened around her wrist with a lingering kiss that morning, was more than a timepiece. It was a heartbeat monitor and a GPS beacon that had already silent-pinged the hand's security hub the moment her pulse spiked in terror. As Micah tried to shove a semi-conscious Imani into the back of the sedan, the air was suddenly ripped apart by the scream of tires. 3 black SUVs tore through the greenhouse fencing, glass shattering like diamonds in the air. Before Micah could even reach for the door handle, he was staring into the barrel of a tactical rifle. The back door of the lead SUV opened, and Yi-hyun stepped out. He didn't look like the man who had whispered poetry to her in the garden. He looked like the Iron Dragon, a creature of ancient, cold fire. His eyes were fixed on the way Micah was holding Imani's arm, and for a heartbeat, the city seemed to stop breathing. "Let go of her," Yi-hyun said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. "Stay back," Micah screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. He pulled a small pocket knife, holding it toward Imani's throat. "She's my sister. She's Caldwell property. You owe us billions for taking her. Give me the money or I'll..." Yi-hyun moved so fast Micah didn't even see the strike. With a single, fluid motion, the Mafia boss closed the distance, his hand snapping Micah's wrist like a dry twig. The knife clattered to the pavement. Yi-hyun caught Imani before she could hit the ground, sweeping her into his arms with a tenderness that was jarring compared to the violence he had just dispensed. He looked down at Micah, who was howling in the dirt, clutching his broken arm. The bodyguards moved in, their faces stone cold. "Property," Yi-hyun repeated, his voice dropping into a terrifyingly calm whisper. He stepped over Micah's groveling form, his boot hovering inches from the boy's throat. "She is a Han, and you just committed the last mistake of your very short life." Imani stirred in his arms, her eyes fluttering open as the sedative failed to take full hold. She saw the tiger tattoo on Yi-hyun's arm, glowing in the afternoon sun, and she felt the steady, powerful thrum of his heart. "Yi-hyun," she breathed, her voice a ghost of a sound. "I have you," he murmured, his gaze softening only for her. "The vultures came for the rain, Imani. Now I'm going to show them the storm." He didn't look back at Micah as he carried her to the car. He didn't need to. He knew that by the time they reached the penthouse, the Caldwell's world would be nothing but ashes. The ride back to the penthouse was a blur of silence and flickering city lights. Imani sat wrapped in Yi Hyun's tailored overcoat, the scent of his expensive cologne, a grounding contrast to the lingering, chemical sting of the rag Micah had used. Yi Hyun didn't speak. He simply held her hand, his thumb tracing the pulse point on her wrist with a rhythmic intensity. He wasn't just checking her heart rate. He was counting the seconds until he could unleash the storm he had been holding back since the night he found her. By the time they reached the fortress of glass, the great dismantling had already begun. While Imani was ushered into a warm bath by her attendants, Yi Hyun stood in his study, the city of souls spread out beneath him like a map of targets. He didn't need guns to destroy the Caldwells. He used the very things they worshipped: status, money, and the illusion of a future. With a single nod to his lead strategist, the foundations of the Caldwell family crumbled. The bridge loan that Terrence had taken out for Micah's app, a loan secretly backed by a subsidiary of the Hand Syndicate, was called in for immediate repayment. The eviction notice for their suburban home was signed, sealed, and dispatched by a courier who arrived before the sun had even set. Every professional bridge Terrence had built over 30 years was incinerated as rumors of criminal instability within the family were leaked to the morning papers. But the final blow was personal. 2 hours later, Terrence and Lorraine were brought to a secure holding area in the basement of one of Yi Hyun's high-rise construction sites. They weren't in a dungeon. They were in a pristine, cold room with nothing but a single table and 2 chairs. They looked like shadows of the people who had stood in their warm dining room a month ago. Terrence was disheveled, his eyes darting toward the heavy steel door, while Lorraine clutched her designer handbag as if it were a life raft. The door opened, and Yi Hyun walked in. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His white sleeves were rolled up, exposing the striking tiger tattoo that seemed to pulse in the harsh fluorescent light. Behind him, 2 guards threw a battered, shivering Micah onto the floor. "Imani is our daughter," Terrence shouted, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "You can't keep her from us. This is kidnapping." Yi Hyun pulled a chair out and sat, leaning forward until he was inches from Terrence's face. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Kidnapping is what your son attempted this afternoon. He tried to trade his sister's life for a bank balance. That makes him a criminal. And you are the ones who gave him the map." "We just wanted what was best for the family," Lorraine whimpered, her face a mask of fake grief. "We're her parents. We have rights." "You lost your rights the moment you locked that door on her 18th birthday, Yi Hyun hissed, his voice a low, terrifying growl. He tossed a thick folder onto the table. "Inside this file is the deed to your house, which I now own. Every cent of debt your son accrued is now held by my firm. You are bankrupt. You are homeless. And by tomorrow morning, you will be social pariahs." He leaned back, his luxury wristwatch catching the light, the same watch Imani wore, a symbol of a bond they would never understand. "I didn't bring you here to negotiate. I brought you here to witness the end of the Caldwell name. From this moment on, if any of you step within a mile of my wife, if you even think her name, I won't use a bank to destroy you. I will use the dragon." He looked at Micah, who was sobbing into the concrete. "You believed your son was the heir who would bring you fortune. You were wrong. The only person of value in your family was the girl you threw away, and now she belongs to the Han dynasty. She is my queen, and you are nothing but the dirt beneath her heels." Yi Hyun stood up, the finality of his presence suffocating the room. "The guards will escort you to the airport. I've booked you a one-way flight to a small town in the countryside where no one knows who you are. You will live the small, insignificant lives you tried to force on her. That is my mercy. Do not test my wrath again." As he walked out, he didn't look back at the people who had broken the girl he loved. He returned to the penthouse, where Imani was waiting for him on the balcony. She looked at him, no longer a girl looking for a savior, but a woman who knew she was loved. "Is it done?" she asked softly. Yi Hyun wrapped his arms around her, pulling her back against his chest. "It is done, Imani. The vultures are gone. There is only the rain and the dragon now." The morning sun over the Han estate didn't just bring light. It brought a profound sense of permanence. A year had passed since the Caldwells were erased from the city's social fabric, and the penthouse that once felt like a gilded cage had become the beating heart of a new dynasty. Imani stood on the terrace, her voluminous curls catching the golden rays, her deep brown skin glowing with a health and vitality that had been absent for 18 years. She was no longer a girl surviving a winter. She was the woman who governed the spring. Beside her, a stone-carved cradle sat in the shade of a flowering cherry tree, and inside, a new life stirred, the next heir to the Han legacy. Yi Hyan walked out to join her, his stride silent and powerful. He didn't look like the cold, unapproachable iron dragon the world feared. When he reached Imani, his expression softened into a look of absolute, profound devotion. He wrapped his arms around her waist, his tiger tattoo visible beneath the rolled-up sleeves of his linen shirt, and rested his chin on her shoulder. "The Foundation's first scholarship gala is tonight," he murmured, his voice a warm hum against her skin. "The Imani Caldwell-Han Grant for Abandoned Youth. Every child who was left behind, just like you were, will now have the fortress they deserve." Imani leaned back into him, her fingers interlacing with his. She looked down at her luxury wristwatch, the same one that had once been her lifeline, and realized she no longer checked it to see how much time she had left before a disaster. She checked it to see how much time she had to change the world. "I had a letter today," she said softly, her voice steady and clear. "From the countryside, a plea for money from Terrence. He says Micah is struggling to find work and Lorraine is unwell." Yi Hyan's grip tightened almost imperceptibly, his protective instinct still as sharp as a blade. "Do you want me to handle it?" Imani turned in his arms, her eyes meeting his with a calm, untouchable strength. "No, I didn't even open it. I gave it to the staff to incinerate. The girl who needed their approval, the girl who died in the rain, she isn't here anymore. They are ghosts, Yi Hyan, and I have stopped believing in hauntings." In that moment, the final emotional tie to her past snapped. There was no anger, no bitterness, only a vast, peaceful indifference. She had realized that the greatest revenge wasn't the dismantling of their lives. It was the fact that she was happy, powerful, and loved beyond measure. They stood together as the most powerful couple in Seoul, a union of fire and rain. Yi Hyan had given her a name and a throne, but Imani had given him something he had never possessed, a soul. She had moved from being a placeholder to becoming the matriarch of the Han Syndicate, managing the Empire's philanthropic arms with a brilliance that left the city's elite in awe. As their son let out a soft, sleepy coo, Yi Hyan leaned down to press a lingering kiss to Imani's forehead. "You are the rain that saved my desert," he whispered. Imani smiled, a radiant, genuine expression that reflected the city lights and the stars alike. "And you are the dragon who taught me how to fly." They walked back into the penthouse together, leaving the shadows of the past behind. The world would always remember the story of the 18-year-old girl who was abandoned by her family, but the